Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, brothers and sisters. A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalam ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Qala rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. I want to welcome all of you back to our lesson. We continue with part B of our first topic, that is personal aspects of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's life. Now, for those ones maybe who have missed part A, we learned about the noble lineage of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which traces all the way back to Nabi Ibrahim. So we learned all the way to Qusay and Kilab. We said Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the son of Abdullahi bin Abdul Muttalib bin Hashim bin Abd Manaf bin Qusay bin Kilab. Please make sure that you can memorize at least those five people from the lineage of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, from the Prophet himself all the way up to Qusay. That is good for your when it comes to exam. It will be easier for you to explain or to answer about the lineage of the Prophet. Now, without wasting time, I want us to jump direct to today's lesson, inshallah. And so we had reached at the part where the Prophet ﷺ is born, and he is going to be taken care by Halima, the foster mother of the Prophet. Now, I'll talk a little bit about how Halima ended up being the foster mother of the Prophet ﷺ. Remember, we said the Prophet ﷺ was born an orphan. That means without a father. His father, Abdullah, died 6 months before the Prophet ﷺ was born. The Prophet ﷺ also was born in the year 517, which is known as the year of the elephants, meaning in the same year that the Prophet ﷺ was born, there was the event of the elephant that took place. In simple terms, Abraham, the governor of Yemen at that time, who was a Christian governor of Yemen, tried to destroy the Kaaba, but he couldn't succeed because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stopped his plan by sending birds, flocks of birds carrying stones, which killed his army and the big elephants that he had. That is why we say the Prophet was born in the year of the elephant. Now remember, when Abdullahi, the father of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, died, he wasn't rich. That means he didn't leave a very, very big, much wealth for the Prophet ﷺ to inherit. So when the Prophet was born, his mother Aminah was poor. Why? Because she had inherited nothing from the father except a few things. So at that time, remember, it was time for hunger. Hunger during it was during the time of hunger. That means the weather was so bad, there was no rain, and people were suffering so much. And the Bedouins, these are the Arabs who lived in the deserts, used to travel all the way to the cities, including Mecca, to find jobs to do. That is for the men, and for the women, they could come and ask for those women who had little children or toddlers to allow them to take the children, go with them to the desert. There they will teach them manners. They will keep away from all the dirtiness and indisciplined life of the city, and the child will come back very, very healthy and will come back very well mannered. That is according to how they agreed with the parent. It could be for a year, 2 years, or more. And so many parents who lived in the city, they loved giving away their children while they were toddlers to give them a very, very good foundation so that they grow up knowing, being disciplined and not knowing the dirtiness that happens in the city. And so during the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, also there were Bedouin women who had traveled all the way from different parts of the desert to come to the city to seek for jobs and others to look for children so that they could agree with the parents. They go with their kids, teach them manners, teach them discipline, teach them the Arabic culture, and in return they are paid by the father of the child, because the fathers were the ones who are taking care of the family. Now, Remember, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't have a father. Abdullahi has already died. Now, among the women that traveled from the Bedouin tribes, we had one woman who came from the uh, Banu Sa'd, if I'm not wrong. Her name was Halima bin Sa'diyah. So Halima came with other women to the city to look for children. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already willed for her to take the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because when she came, all other women who were searching for babies, they got their children, but no any other woman who wanted to take Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Reason being, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't have a father. And so remember, these women came for the purpose of earning income, being paid by the father of the child. And so if you take a child who is an orphan, who is going to pay you? No one. And so every woman was scared to take the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the women had already finished their activities in the city and it was time to go back, Halima had not found a baby yet. And so she saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she went to talk to the husband, saying, that woman there seated with the child, no one wants to take the child because the child is an orphan. And for me on my side, I've not found a child to take back home. How about I take this child? Maybe the child will be a source of income, a source of blessing. Sorry, and that is how Halima ended up taking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Aminah gave the Prophet to Halima gladly as they had agreed, and when Halima with the husband took the child, blessing began. Remember, Halima had come all the way from the desert to come to look for a child like other women, for a source of income, so that they could be paid by the father. But now she's taking the Prophet because she doesn't have any other option. All the other women have gotten children, and it's not good for her to go back empty-handed. But now, when she took the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, her chest was full of milk. Remember, it is during a famine. There is no food. She is very thin. She can't even produce milk for her own son to breastfeed her. But once she takes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, blessings began. Her chest is full of milk. She can breastfeed her child and also the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remember, long time ago during the Arab culture, that was a norm. It was very, very okay to take a child and breastfeed the child and take care of the child. So again, the camel that they came with also is full of milk. They drink, they find dead trees, and also blessings followed after blessing, after blessing, after other blessing. So that's the reason why Halima took the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now let's look at birth and early life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We looked at it a little bit yesterday, saying that the Prophet was born in 570 CE, that is the year of the elephant. Also, he was orphaned early, and the mother of the Prophet died at the age of 6 at Al Abwa. So, I want us to talk about that a little bit. So, Halima has taken the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she has decided to stay with the Prophet. So, Halima was a farmer. Remember, we said the Arabs, we had those ones who were farmers, had others who were hunters and gatherers, and then we had others who were nomads. Nomads are the ones who kept livestock, mostly camels and sheep and goat, and they could walk around, move around, looking for greener pastures and water to feed their animals. So Halima and her husband and their family, they were farmers, and so the Prophet ﷺ helped them, took care of their animals. That that is how the Prophet ﷺ ended up being a shepherd when he was still young. The Holy Quran says, "Did he not find you an orphan and give you shelter? Alam yajidika yatiman fa'awa." So we'll be looking at why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam on how he found him an orphan and give him shelter. The first reason is how the Prophet ended up in the household of Halima. See, he is an orphan. Other children have been paid for, but he has been taken for free. All this is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. So Halima stayed with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for a period of 2 years, as they had agreed, and she returned the Prophet ﷺ to Aminah, but asked Aminah if she could allow her to stay more because the Prophet has been a blessing all the time. The Prophet has been staying there. And so Aminah agreed. And so the second time she stayed with Halima was for a period of 3 years, totaling to 5 years. At first 2 years, the second time 3 years, that is a total of 5 years. And we'll be looking shortly on why the Halima returned the Prophet after 5 years of staying with him. So we said the Prophet father died at his birth and the mother died at the age of 6. But how did the mother die? Now, when Halima stayed with the Prophet at the second phase now, after returning the Prophet, the 2 years, first 2 years, and then now the second 2 years, now there is something that happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Angel Jibril alayhi salam to go and prepare the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam for his mission of Islam. And how is that? By cleansing the heart of the Prophet from any temptation, from any evil that is in this world. And so Angel Jibril came when the Prophet was herding, looking after the livestock with other children. And then he took the Prophet ﷺ, split his chest, took out his heart, and washed the heart with Zamzam water, and put back the heart to the chest of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, remember, the Prophet wasn't looking after animals alone. There were other children there too, and they saw the scene that happened. So they were scared and they ran back home crying, knowing that the Prophet ﷺ had been killed. So Halima got the news and went to check on the Prophet, but she found the Prophet had already been washed and the chest was put back. The Prophet had already regained the consciousness. But when Halima checked the chest of the Prophet, there was a mark there, meaning that all the things that the children have narrated to her had happened. So Halima was scared of the sin. Remember, she doesn't know why, what happened to the Prophet, and she doesn't know why it happened to the Prophet. So she was scared. Maybe the Prophet could die in her watch, and it was good. She thought it was good for her to take the Prophet ﷺ back to the mother, who is Aminah. So that is how the Prophet was taken back to Aminah yet again. So when Aminah took back the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet was at the age of 5. She stayed with her for 1 year, and in the next year, she decided to take the Prophet ﷺ to visit his uncles back in Yathrib. Remember, Amina roots were in Yathrib, which is now called Medina. So Aminah, together with the grandfather of the Prophet, Abdul Muttalib, together with the maid or the servant of Aminah, who was left by Abdullahi by the name of Ayman or Baraka. She was known as Ayman because she had a son called Ayman, who will also be a great a follower of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and of Islam, as we talk about the seerah of the Prophet. So Ayman, Abdul Muttalib, and Aminah, together with the Prophet, they leave for Medina. So in Medina, they stay for a period of 1 month. There, the Prophet is introduced to his uncles, the brothers and the sisters, also the brothers and the cousins to Aminah, and also he is introduced to his cousin friends from the mother's side, and also he learns many things, for example, swimming and riding of kites and other things. After 1 month, they come back. But while they are coming back, on the way at a place called Al Abwa, which is a few miles, like 6 miles away from Makkah, Aminah dies. So Aminah dies at Al Abwa, and she is buried there at this place called Al Abwa. So who will take the custody of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Most eventually the grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. So Aminah died when the Prophet was at the age of 6 years old. So at 6 years old, Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet, takes custody of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he stays with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, loving him like his own son or grandson, and loving him, staying with him. There, in some riwayas, it narrates that Abdul Muttalib used to stay to sleep mostly at the Kaaba or to relax at the Kaaba, and he could allow only the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to sit with him on his mat or a blanket. Even his own children were not allowed to sit with him, and that showed how he loved the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But again, he stayed with the Prophet ﷺ as his custodian for only 2 years, and also Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet, dies. So he dies when the Prophet is at the age of 8. But before he dies, he asked Abu Talib to take care of the Prophet ﷺ. So Abu Talib is the brother to Abdullahi, who is the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. So after the death of the grandfather Abdul Muttalib, Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet now, will be the one who will take care of the Prophet ﷺ until the Prophet ﷺ starts the mission of preaching Islam, starts the mission of prophethood. So the foster mother of the Prophet ﷺ, Halima Sa'diyah, developed Arabic eloquence and moral strength to the Prophet ﷺ because he taught him discipline, he taught him Arabic, and he taught him strength, moral strength, how to stand up for himself, how to be a leader through being a shepherd. Now we go to the next part, upbringing and influence of Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet, now who has taken the Prophet at the age of 8 years old. So Abu Talib raised him also as his own. He had other sons, for example, Jafar and Ali, but the Prophet, remember, was older than the sons of Abu Talib. So he took Muhammad SAW on a trade journey to Syria at the age of 12, where he thought that the Prophet SAW at that time had reached the age where he can know about trading and whatnot. So again, also he was a loyal protector of the Prophet ﷺ during the early years of Dawah. We are going to talk about the journey, the first journey of trading to Syria, where Abu Talib took the Prophet ﷺ when he was 12 years old. But I want you to mark this key trait that Abu Talib never accepted Islam and remained at the Prophet's staunch supporter. So he was one of the best friends and protector of the Prophet ﷺ, but he never accepted Islam. That means he never died as a Muslim. Don't forget that. But he was very close to the Prophet. That doesn't change the fact that he was one of the most closest people to the Prophet and the protector of the Prophet ﷺ. So on the journey of the Prophet ﷺ at the year when he was 12 years old. Now, I want us to talk about that journey a little bit, where we'll be talking about a Christian monk known as Bahir. So when the Prophet ﷺ was the age of 12 years old, remember he's still not a prophet at this time. Abu Talib's uncle still was going for the journeys to Yemen and Syria for the trade journeys, and this time he decides to take the Prophet ﷺ. When he takes the Prophet ﷺ, they go on the journey together with other men, but on the way they meet a Christian monk known as Bahira. Now, for a monk, for those people who don't know who a monk is, these were people who dedicated their life to studying about religion. Can be Christian religion, Islamic religion, or a combination of many other religion, but they lived a life of a religious life of research, full of research. All their life they dedicated it to religious purposes. So on their way, they meet Bahira, who is a monk, who welcomes them and tells them to come and have a dinner or lunch, whatever it was, with him. So Bahira, before welcoming Abu Talib with the group, he had seen something and he knew there's something odd with this child. This child is not like other children that I've seen. When the Prophet was moving together with Abu Talib, when they were on the way, the clouds were covering the Prophet ﷺ from the hot sun of the desert. The other people who were with the Prophet, they could not realize that, but Bahira realized. And then when the Prophet was moving, however he was passing the trees could bend a little bit, not like bending all over, but bending a little bit, showing that they were bowing to the Prophet ﷺ, showing a sign of respect. Remember, these are trees, not people. Bahira realized that and knew that this child is a very a very great person in religion. And so he welcomed them. They enter the house and leave the Prophet ﷺ outside looking after the camels. Remember, when they were going for their trade journeys, they could go with a lot of camels to come back carrying goods. And so the Prophet is left outside on the watch of the camels. But when they enter the house, Bahira says, there is someone who is missing. And they say, no, this is us. Say, no, 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 there's one person who is missing. Say, oh, you mean the young man we were with? Yeah, that one is the one. Oh, he's looking after the camels, but if you insist, let us call him in. So they called the Prophet ﷺ inside the house to sit with them and eat together with them. Now, Bahira asked the prophets many questions regarding the Arabs, regarding the Arab culture. For example, how does the prophet feel about idol worship and what he says about it? And the prophet said he doesn't believe in that, and he says that those worshipping of those idols is false worship because they cannot speak, they cannot punish. Who else did that, or who else hated idols? Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so he asked many other things, and the Prophet ﷺ answered them maturely as a big person. And this made Bahira know that this man is going to be a prophet in future. And so he asked Abu Talib, who is this young man to you? And Abu Talib lies to him, this is my son. And so Bahira already knows, no, this cannot be your son. So he tells Abu Talib, this is not your son, you're lying. And Abu Talib wonders, how do you know? And we have just met today. How comes you know that? And Bahira tells him, I remember I've studied many religious books. I've been reading religious book, and I know of a prophet. There is a prophet who has been talked about in these religious books who will be coming. The seal of the prophet, the last prophet who will be coming. And this prophet is this young man. Because in these books, the prophet who is spoken about is said to be born an orphan. And that means that you're not the father. All the signs I've seen in this young man is a prophet, and you cannot be the father because the prophet who is said to come later after Nabi Isa will be an orphan. And so if this young man is a prophet, indeed is going to be a prophet, that means he doesn't have a father. And so Abu Talib believed that the Prophet ﷺ is really blessed and is going to be a prophet. And so Bahira asked Abu Talib, I ask of you, don't go with him to Syria, because they were just a few miles to Syria. He says, if the people here realizes what I've realized, they're going to kill him. Yeah. And so Abu Talib assigns a few men to take back the Prophet ﷺ back to Mecca. And that is how they ended up meeting Bahira, the Christian monk, and how Bahira recognized the signs of prophethood in young Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And he urged Abu Talib to protect him from the enemies. This boy will be a prophet of this nation. That is what he said. So we move to the early work of the Prophet ﷺ, or his occupation. So we have already spoken about the Prophet ﷺ being a shepherd when he was staying with Halima bin Sa'diyah. So the first occupation of the Prophet, he worked as a shepherd, and through working as a shepherd, through being a shepherd, looking after animals, this taught him patience. Because when you look after animals, when you're grazing, you have to be patient. Animals, they don't have the intelligence of human beings. They have brains, but they don't have intelligence. You cannot tell a sheep, hey, you sheep, stay here, don't go to that farm, I'm coming. You'll find the sheep, all of them in the farm eating. And so you have to be patient. You are directing this sheep this side, the other one is running away to the other side. So this taught the prophet how to be a leader and to be patient with his people, and also to be humble, humility. Because when you're looking after animals, it is a downgraded job, and you have to be humble. If someone sees you, they look at you as if you don't have a life. So it teaches you to be humble, humility, one of the traits of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, that is one of the occupation. But now, after the journey to Syria, the Prophet went back to Mecca, and he was helping people in their shops. The Prophet was like this office messenger who you want to send somewhere, you want to go buy something, you call him and send him. And the Prophet was very trustworthy. He could bring you back all the Prophet, for example, you send him to sell goods, he brings you back all the profit that he made up to the last shilling, and he always says the truth. And that led the people of Makkah calling the prophet, or nicknaming the prophet, two names. First one is Al Amin, meaning the most trustworthy, or a trustworthy person. And the second one, As Siddiq, that means the most truthful, or a truthful person, a person who always said the truth. Now that name went all over Markup. If you want an errand run for you, You just say, hey, have you seen Alamin? And the Prophet will be called. And in that manner, on how the name spread, it reached a very wealthy woman who was also in Makkah by the name of Khadijah. Now, Khadijah was very, very rich, but she didn't have a husband. Okay, she was divorced to two husbands previously, and at this time she didn't want to get married again. Okay, and so she heard of a person called Alamin and As-Siddiq. And remember, she is a businessman. She wants a person to send to different places to do business for her. So if you hear a person who is called the most trustworthy and the most trustworthy and the most truthful, that is a person who you will wish to work for you. And so she ends up sending her best friend called Nafisa to go and call the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to ask the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam if he wouldn't mind working for Khadijah. And so that is first how the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam ends up meeting Khadijah. We're going to talk about that. But now, for now, the two occupations of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, number one was a shepherd, which taught the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam patience and humility. And the second one, he became a trustworthy trader called Al Amin and As Siddiq. And this led him to being employed by Khadijah radiallahu anha due to his honesty. Now, being a shepherd was a trade shared by many prophets, including Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam, including Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, including Nabi Zakaria alayhi salam, and many, many other prophets who were shepherds. Nabi Zakaria, I'm not sure if he was a shepherd or a carpenter. I'll confirm on that. But I'm sure of Nabi Isa. I'm sure of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, Nabi Yaqub, Nabi Musa, and we have many others who are shepherds, including Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, let us talk about now his journey. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been called by Khadijah. So Khadijah wants to send the Prophet on a journey to Syria. The Prophet agrees. So the Prophet goes to Syria to go sell some goods in Syria, goods belonging to Khadijah. And Khadijah assigned him one of her slaves or her servants by the name of Maysara to go together with the Prophet to help the Prophet where he could. So they go together to Syria, and that journey is successful because the Prophet ﷺ sells a lot never before. And so he makes a lot of profits for Khadijah. And on the way, also, when he's talking to Maysara, he teaches Maysara of many, many great things, which Maysara starts looking towards the Prophet differently. Remember, he looked at him as just an errand man, a person who helps Khadijah in business. But now he saw there is something different about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, same way what Bahira had realized before. And so he goes and narrates all this back when they go back to Khadijah. And also he says on how the Prophet ﷺ was very good in doing business and how he made a lot of profit and he brought every penny that he had made. And so this makes Khadijah very happy. Remember, no any other person had made his business easier like the Prophet ﷺ. So again, Khadijah sends Nafisa to the Prophet ﷺ to go and confirm why the Prophet ﷺ is not married. And so Nafisa goes, asks around, and he's told the Prophet is not married because he doesn't have that wealth yet to pay for mahar for a woman when he is lucky to find a woman. And so Nafisa asked, what if, ask the Prophet now, what if you find a person who is already wealthy and has the money? So will you be able to marry this person? The Prophet says, yeah, why not? What if she's older than you? The Prophet says, yeah, I'm okay with that. And so Nafisa is very happy, sends back the message to Khadijah. Khadijah Nafisa breaks to the Prophet that it was Khadijah who had sent her to ask the Prophet. And so the Prophet organizes with his uncle Hamza together with Abu Talib. They go to the uncles of Khadijah, ask for hand in marriage, and the Prophet ﷺ marries Khadijah when the Prophet is 25 years old and Khadijah is 40 years old. That is a difference of 15 years. Remember, Khadija is a widow. I mean, not a divorcee, a widow at that time. So she wasn't married to another woman, another man. And so the Prophet ﷺ married her at the age of 40, while the Prophet was the age of 25. So their marriage lasted for a period of 25 years until her death. The Prophet ﷺ never married another woman until Khadija died. So she was emotional, financial, and spiritual supporter to the Prophet ﷺ. And we'll be looking at that, especially during the time when the Prophet ﷺ uh, gets the first revelation. So that is it up to the marriage to Khadijah. So when we come back, we're going to look at part C of this first topic. And then after that, we will go to topic number 2. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalam.